Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. There was no Georgia football this weekend, and there wasn't even a full slate of games altogether. But, man, there is so much to talk about today. It's like one of those deals where there's like a lot of little stories that we have to hit over the course of our time together. We will do that, including a roundup of who's apparently leaving Georgia via the transfer portal and also some sort of speculating about who might be coming in. We'll do that. There are also big movement around the SEC as it relates to the portal and a sort of a burgeoning controversy involving one of the playoff teams that could become an opponent for the Georgia Bulldogs. We got to cover all of that today, but I want to begin with what has been the hottest topic on the field for Georgia since the SEC championship, and that is the excitement, the enthusiasm that seems to exist around Gunner Stockton here right now. We're going to kind of give you everything that's out there about that as a lot of Georgia fans look forward to rallying around their guy stepping in for the injured Carson Beck for this Sugar Bowl. And by the way, this weekend we'll also find out who Georgia's playing in that game too. So there's a lot to get to. We're glad you're with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
All right, coming up in just a few minutes, I want you to be aware of this. We've got a lot of really good details for you about our DawgNation invasion to New Orleans. We've been telling you about it, but I want to give you more of the specific details on this coming up in a moment, because this is really that week when a lot of people make their decision about, okay, what are we doing for the Sugar Bowl? Are we going to go? Well, once you hear about all the travel plans that we have for you on this, you may kind of make that last-minute decision to, sometimes you do this where you kind of give something to somebody as a gift that you actually want for yourself. As a father of children, I know what that's like for sure. Well, many of you may decide to do that too. When you hear more about the details of our DawgNation invasion, I'm going to give it to you coming up in just a moment. Prior to that, let me begin with this. You know, we say all the time that DawgNation Daily is the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. I've told you before, the reason why I say that every day is as much a reminder to me as it is to anything else, that we're not trying to be a show for the other media types. We're not trying to be a show that sort of exists for the coaching community or anything like that. We're a show that is for the fans. And our conversation, one way or another, needs to reflect the conversation that Georgia fans are having. In other words, if the average fan, if when they're getting together around the kitchen table or the tailgate or whatever else, if they're talking about stuff and our show is not reflecting that conversation, we've done something wrong. We've made a very big mistake. And so I always try to say that as a reminder to me that the show's backbone will always be reflecting the conversation that Georgia fans are having. Well, I have to confess something here for a moment. I think that I've been a little bit out of step with some Georgia fans post-SEC championship, not intentionally, and I would say that I'm kind of still within the same zip code of this, but maybe just not quite the same level of intensity. Georgia fans are really, really, really excited about Gunner Stockton. They really liked the spark that Georgia got when Stockton came in after the injury to Carson Beck, and in the sort of, what is it now, 8 days or so since the SEC championship, I would say when it comes to stuff involving Georgia on the field, Gunner Stockton has been by far and away the hottest topic out there. It's just amazing how much energy there exists around Gunner Stockton here right now. Now, if you've been a regular listener, you know that I have tried to be a little nuanced about some of this. I've tried to say, man, big believer in Stockton, think he's got an incredibly bright future at UGA. Glad to know that Georgia's got a capable backup like this who could step in the situation where it appears that Carson Beck likely won't play. Very positive about Gunner overall. But the warning I've tried to give is, hey, let's just leave a little bit of room for Gunner to perhaps have some space to exceed our expectations. That if we set our expectations so high that all Gunner can do is meet them, all Gunner can do is match them, well, at that point, we've kind of created an uncomfortable scenario where it's more likely than not that he disappoints. And we don't want to do that. We want to be fair to Gunner, but we also want to be just sort of sensible in our conversation. So let's say that step one is just to be a capable replacement a quality, guy that can step in as a backup quarterback and have a chance to have a well-functioning offense. And if he goes out there and turns out to be, of others have said, like the next Stetson Bennett, who, by the way, was a Heisman finalist, let's keep that in mind, then we'll obviously all have plenty of opportunity to be elated. We'll be thrilled. We'll be so excited. But let's just leave some space for that. Let's just create an opportunity for him to perhaps exceed our expectations. Let's not set the expectations so high that he can only meet them. But at a certain point, you got to realize that this is a snowball that's just sort of running down the mountain right now, and that there is very little desire to hear any of my boring nuance, any of my sort of more measured and careful talk. That's just not very interesting. That's just not very exciting. That is not what people want. So if I'm going to play the hits and sort of be the show for fans and talk about what fans want to talk about, right now fans want to talk about how great Gunner Stockton is. So let me give you a couple of examples of that, starting with one of the true legends at the position. I'm amazed at even, now at what is a very advanced age, Frank Tarkenton remains a very outspoken guy, putting stuff out on social media and things like that. He's always been a really, really interesting figure. And I think Fran was the quarterback. Y'all help me out with this. Late 50s, the really good 1959 team, I believe. My dad, I think, went to some of those games. The really good 1959 team, I believe Frank Tarkenton was the quarterback for that. Became a record-setting legend in the NFL for the Vikings and the Giants. This is a guy who had a pro football Hall of Fame career and obviously very good at Georgia too. He is the true example of a living legend around the program. And even in his sort of post-playing career, had a lot of time around the media, things like that. Just a really interesting, successful businessman, very, very outspoken dude. And on social media the other day, Frank Tarkenton sort of weighed in as a legendary former quarterback about what he sees with what might be the current Georgia quarterback, Gunner Stockton, stepping in place of Carson Beck. And for the Georgia fans who are very, very optimistic right now about Gunner Stockton's chances for success in the college football playoff, you'll love what Francis Tarkenton had to say about that too. This is the former Georgia legend weighing in on what we think is going to be the current Georgia starter. Here is Tarkenton on Gunner Stockton.
If a quarterback can play quarterback, you see it right away. And he came in and he sparked the team. He got us a touchdown. He got us into the game, and he helped us win the game. And he had the confidence that good quarterbacks have got to have, even before they've had great experience. Now he's going to have to play in the playoffs because our starting quarterback is hurt and probably won't play. But I think the Georgia Bulldogs are in really good shape with Gunter. He is the real deal, and I think he's going to play in the playoffs as good as any quarterback in the country. Go Dogs.
So that's Frank Tarkenton weighing in. I have my DawgNation.com comment section open on my laptop in front of me. Matt Goodwin says that Frank Tarkenton also lives in Rabun County, which is obviously the hometown area for Gunner Stockton. I did not realize that, but that's certainly very interesting. We would say one of the most beautiful parts of the state overall. Now, because of that, you might say, well, listen, Tarkenton's a Georgia guy. Apparently he lives the same area that Stockton's family's from. Maybe his objective or his viewpoint on this is not quite as objective as it otherwise could be. This isn't, after all, exactly a neutral observer. And if you thought that about Tarkenton in this case, perhaps you might be right. Clearly he is a Georgia guy. And if you look at some of his social media stuff, he's typically sort of weighing in on his teams, Georgia, Vikings, like that. Those are sort of the teams that he's sort of talking about, the teams that he played for. So clearly he has a more vested interest in the outcome here. He's not exactly weighing in on, I don't know. Pick whatever the other quarterback in college football. Not exactly weighing in on those guys necessarily. Mostly just sort of looking at the Georgia part of this or the NFL teams that he played on, that situation. So perhaps Tarkenton not the most objective guy out there, but a much more objective observer, a guy who is outside kind of the boundaries of DawgNation, an SEC analyst, Cole Kubelik, when he was on his show the other day, what he was saying about Gunner Stockton very much closely resembles what the former Georgia legend was saying. Frank Tarkenton says is if you play quarterback, you recognize quarterbacks, and I see something in Gunner Stockton. I see a guy who gave the Georgia offense a spark. I see a guy who the team believes in. I see a guy who brought a new level of energy to Georgia. And he says, I think that Gunner's going to have, Georgia's going to be in good hands when it comes to Gunner Stockton. He's going to play as well as any quarterback does in the college football playoff. That's what Tarkenton says. A guy who would maybe have a reason to say that because of his allegiance to Georgia. But someone like Cole Kubelik, the SEC network analyst who also has his own podcast, he is nowhere near as beholden to DawgNation to say those type of things. But when you listen to Kubelik, it's also very interesting that his overall words on this do very much closely resemble what Frank Tarkenton said. Here's Cole Kubelik to sort of echo this idea that a brand new spark came for the Georgia offense because of the arrival of Gunner Stockton. Take a listen to this.
Now, I called one of Gunner's games in high school. I talked to his high school coaches. I talked to some of his teammates, people around the program. I feel like I have a decent idea of his personality. Also, watching him play in high school, try to run people over and essentially be a fullback if he had to, set all the passing records, but just tough as nails. And the things that his coaches said about him and seeing how he's operated the couple of times he has been in the game, I understood what was happening. The Georgia sideline, when you kind of finally saw, okay, this is it, he's going in, there was this new life that just started to explode. Guys bopping up and down, patting each other on the head, getting behind it. There was an excitement within that team.
So there is Cole Kubelik saying, hey, it's a new excitement, it's a new level of energy, that Georgia kind of changed. It became a different team once Gunner Stockton came in at quarterback. And if you're watching the SEC championship, obviously you saw some version of that yourself. Georgia came marching down the field to score a touchdown to start the third quarter, and the big-time yardage, time of possession imbalance that favored Texas in the first half, well, that dramatically shifted in the third quarter, and a lot of that, I think, can be attributed to Gunner Stockton's insertion into the game. So if you're a regular listener, viewer to me in this show and you kind of care about my opinion a little bit, then you might be well within your rights to ask, well, BA, if someone like Cole Kubelik is this over the moon excited about Gunner Stockton, and if Frank Tarkenton, the great legend, if he's this excited about Gunner Stockton, and if you yourself have said that you're a big believer in Gunner Stockton, then why the need for nuance? Why the need to pump the brakes on the enthusiasm? Why can't people just have a good time with all of this? And, of course, I would say that people are certainly free and willing to have a good time with whatever they want to. But my reason for being, I guess, a little less, sort of out there on this and outspoken on this is my overarching belief on everything when it comes to this sport that we all love, college football, is that everything about college football is hard. I think the game itself is hard. Playing the game is hard. But I also think predicting the game is really hard too. In other words, we saw success for Georgia against Texas, and now against what we might perceive to be lesser competition, we might assume, well, it gets even easier and therefore even better for Georgia moving forward. But college football is still hard, even if you're the better team playing against lesser competition. And for those of us who like making our picks and sort of making our predictions and our prognostications, well, that's never been easy. And the moment we think that it is easy, of boom, I've seen this for myself, I know exactly how this is going to play out. Gunner Stockton is going to be the next sort of historic figure for Georgia football that kind of comes in and saves the day, much like Stetson Bennett did for the first time in 2021. I just think we get really, really dangerous when we assume that all of a sudden the sport is easy to play or easy to predict. That's never been true, nor will it ever be true. So as a way of kind of balancing this out for a moment and then bringing it back to a happy ending when it's all said and done, let me give you a very different opinion. And based on the overwhelming mood and attitude that's out there, you're going to hate this clip that I'm about to play. I don't play it for you to troll you or because you'll hate it, but I just want to balance out the conversation, that because for every former Georgia great who's saying what he's saying, or SEC network analysts like Cole Kubelik who's saying what he's saying, you also have people like Joel Klatt, who perhaps is not necessarily objective. Maybe he's sort of anti-SEC, maybe to a degree anti-Georgia because of the network that he works for. We'll at least be open to that possible consideration. But Joel Klatt, when it comes to his evaluation of Gunner Stockton, is certainly saying something very different here right now. This is some skepticism about Stockton from a guy who works for a very different network covering a very different league, but nonetheless, Joel Klatt on Gunner Stockton.
This is a downgrade. There is no other way to look at this. The problem is that defense has been a bit up and down. They allowed 41 to Bama. They allowed 28 to Ole Miss. They allowed 27 in regulation to Georgia Tech, 42 total in that game. They allowed 31 to Mississippi State, who didn't score 30 in any other FBS games this year. So it's like, is Georgia really the Georgia of 2 years ago? No, it's not. You've got to separate yourself from the logo a little bit, and you have to actually look at this team for what it is now. The path for Georgia is going out there and winning with defense. Now, can they do that? Absolutely. Can they do that 3 times? That's a much tougher question. I believe at some point during their run to a potential national championship, they're going to have to get into and win a shootout. Can they do that with Gunner Stockton and that group of wide receivers? I have my questions and my doubts.
So let me try to break this down a couple of different ways here. And let me start with what Klatt says at the beginning of that clip, is that Klatt says that Gunner Stockton will be a downgrade from Carson Beck. Well, let's just say this in sort of blunt language here for a moment. Carson Beck has been the Georgia starting quarterback for 2 years. If he was healthy, Georgia would start him in the Sugar Bowl. So the fact that he's not healthy and not going to play, I think in the most literal sense possible, Gunner Stockton is a downgrade from Carson Beck. Now, he provides a new spark and a new energy, has a very different skill set, and all those things are justifiable to be excited about. But at a sort of literal level, Stockton does represent a downgrade over your previous starting quarterback. If that wasn't true, Stockton would already be the starting quarterback. But as you know, the issue is not whether or not he's a downgrade or not. The issue is, can he still get the job done? We would say emphatically and clearly, yes, of course, Gunner Stockton can still get the job done for UGA. The other thing that Klatt mentions there is, well, the Georgia defense, can they win a national championship with defense? We would say, yes, they can. Now, we think that Joel Klatt's right when he says, hey, at times this year, Georgia's had a little bit of an uneven performance defensively. That's certainly true. I would say a bad game stopping the run against Tech, gave up way too much garbage time stuff against Mississippi State, a team, as Klatt correctly points out, did not really do that against anybody else but Georgia here this year. All of that's really fair. But at the same time, just look at teams in the playoff. Georgia held Clemson to 3 points. Georgia held Texas to 15 points in its own stadium, and then fewer than 20 points just last Saturday. Georgia, held Tennessee's offense in check. That's 4 games against teams currently in the playoff. The Georgia defense showed up for all 4 of those. So this idea that somehow the Georgia defense can't show up for the next 3 games and help Georgia win a national championship, I think you're cherry-picking the stats if you say they can't do that, because against the best teams that Georgia's played, for the most part this year, they've done their job, with the exception of obviously a really terrible first quarter against Alabama. Even the loss to Ole Miss, Georgia held that team to 3 field goal tries that day. For the most part, the Georgia defense even kind of still did its job against Ole Miss, although not a great and a stellar game. And the idea, well, if Georgia's going to have to win a shootout, can Gunner Stockton do it? Well, listen, there are a lot of folks who didn't think they could win a shootout with the offense they had when Carson Beck was healthy. But they did that against Tech, and, they've, certainly got back into the game against Alabama, albeit falling a little bit short. So the point here is simply this, is that I do think that Georgia fans should be too careful getting too far out there on how great things are going to be with Gunner Stockton at quarterback. I think that you do need to leave some room for him to perhaps exceed your expectations. Don't set the expectations so high that he can only meet them. But at the same time, someone like Joel Klatt, who takes an excessively contrarian point of view that somehow Georgia is now doomed, we think that's obviously wrong as well. That the actual story here is the same thing that college football always is. The game is hard to play. The outcomes are difficult to predict. But when you look at the totality of everything happening around Georgia, not just Stockton, but the stuff happening around him as well, these Georgia Bulldogs could be just as ready for success in the college football playoff as they have been in recent years. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We're glad you're with us, no matter how you get to us. Video, radio, typically, although Lady Dogs basketball does preempt us today on 960 The Ref. Podcast, Apple, Spotify, everything else. Just really, really happy that you're a part of our program with us. Thanks to our friends for Pella Window and Door of Georgia, making it possible here, too. Got a good chance to hang out with my friends from Pella tomorrow. I'm looking forward to all of that. Pella Window and Door of Georgia is also looking forward to hanging out with you. If it's time for you to make the big upgrade, think about better windows, better doors, more energy-efficient windows and doors, a product that just looks really good on the outside of your house, increasing that curb appeal. If you're a homeowner, you know how important it is to do the best job you can of taking the most care of your home. And that's what Pella Window and Door of Georgia is going to give you a chance to do. So go out and see them at their Experience Center in Duluth, or have them come out to your home for a free, no-pressure consultation. Let them simply educate you on why their product is better, why Pella Window and Door of Georgia is going beyond, and how your home can feel the best it possibly can on the inside, look the best it possibly can on the outside, how you can take great care of all of that with our friends from Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Also, don't forget, between now and the end of the year, December 31st, 10% off Pella Projects Plus for 3 weeks only, no payments until 2027. So you got to jump on that fast to take advantage of that. Find them online, PellaGA.com/DawgNation. That's PellaGA.com/DawgNation. Or give them a call, 678-638-1429. That's 678-638-1429. Pella Window and Door of Georgia is going beyond. Just make sure you tell them, though, that BA from DawgNation Daily sent you to them, because I know they're going to take great care of you. All right, before we go around the doghouse, before we bring on John Stinchcomb, let me also give you more details on this. As I started the show by saying, we got all the big information now about our DawgNation invasion to New Orleans. So this is really the week when a lot of people are making those sort of official final travel plans for the Sugar Bowl. And frankly, many of you perhaps on the fence about, are you going or not? Well, when you hear about all of the stuff we have going on here, I think it's going to cause you to want to pull that trigger and really be a part of this. So here's what we got going on for you. The game is obviously on January 1st. You can get either a 2-night or a 3-night stay there at the Sheraton in the French Quarter. So we're talking about a wonderful hotel right there in kind of the heart of it all there in New Orleans. We're going to have a New Year's Eve party with all kinds of Georgia fans hanging out and having a great time. And then on the day of the game, a 3-hour all-inclusive tailgate right outside the Superdome. If you've been a part of our DawgNation Invasion tailgates, you know how much fun they are. So big party the night before, big event the day of the game, the great tailgate. And then, of course, a wonderful, hotel stay there at the Sheraton French Quarter if you like that. The 2-night, the 3-night. There's some flexibility here. In other words, sort of fit your needs here. Our friends at Atlanta Sports Trips got you covered on all that. So check out DawgNation.com/tailgate. You can get involved on that. DawgNation.com/tailgate. You can get involved on that. You can also check out our friends online at Atlanta Sports Trips, too, atlsportstrips.com, if you want to do that as well. So they got you covered on everything there for that. Going to be a great, great time. Now, before I bring on John Stinchcomb here today, let me also go around the doghouse, poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper. And by the way, Dr. Pepper also a big part of our DawgNation invasion here coming up, too. But around the doghouse here, poured by Dr. Pepper, let's do two things here for a moment. This is one of those things where I told you that sometimes our Around the Doghouse segment has to be a little bit of like a repository for just all that's going on. So let me try to give you a couple of things here for a moment, starting with, I think we now have, and y'all check my math on this to make sure I'm correct, I believe we now have a total of 7 Georgia players in the transfer portal, I believe. Is that right? Double check me on this. Let's show you these names here as we kind of have them, as more of those came out kind of last week. So you got Michael Jackson, the wide receiver, obviously bad timing for him. Jamal Jarrett, the big space-eating defensive lineman. I've told you before, that's a body type I'd like to see Georgia find a way to replicate. Not always easy to find those type of guys. Sam Mpemba is an example, I believe, of, a couple of years ago, the former 5-star like this going to the portal would have been a source of panic. People would be really, really worried about that. I don't think you see as much of that right now, just simply because I think people know that Mpemba may be a very good prospect, but he never really kind of found his way on the field at Georgia. And, if you've been here for a couple of years and it hasn't quite worked out, then perhaps you're just not, it should not be a surprise if a guy like that eventually transfers. Troy Bowles in there. Let's make sure we check the spelling on that. But Troy Bowles is in the transfer portal. Once again, a guy that came to Georgia with some accolades, but just in a very crowded inside linebacker situation where even young guys coming in like, Chris Cole and Justin Williams, that eventually when the young guys start sort of passing you up, once again, no disrespect to Bowles, who may go somewhere else, become a very good player, and perhaps would even consider a different position as he does so. When you've got young guys coming in who start to sort of encroach upon the playing time you'd have liked to have gotten, at a certain point, the writing's perhaps on the wall on that. Then we have a few more transfers we can show here. Julian Humphrey, we now know where he's going. He's going to Texas A&M. And then a couple of defensive backs going to the portal here this weekend. Jake Pope, that's perhaps been in the working now for quite some time. And then Justin Redd, who I think people would have thought, maybe this guy has a chance to have, have a spot here at Georgia. But sometimes guys get impatient, and more than a third of the guys you bring in are going to probably leave via the transfer portal eventually. And so if you bring somebody in and he doesn't find that sort of spot kind of right away, then you're sort of left to wonder, well, how long are you, kind of capable of keeping him and holding on to him? So those are the 7 names for Georgia that are in the portal. Now, in addition to that, I thought that Connor Riley this morning, if you read this at DawgNation.com, had a terrific story where he looked at, okay, well, what can we sort of say now after all the rumors and the rumblings and the grumblings and all of that? What can we say right now in terms of who Georgia might be going after in the portal? I thought that the story itself is worth reading at DawgNation.com because it puts all this into context. But we are starting to see some of those names out there that all of a sudden Georgia may be going after. So let me give you a few of these here right now, various position groups. A couple of quarterbacks. I guess the new name here is Dylan Lonergan. This is the former Brookwood quarterback who'd been in Alabama, obviously a 2-sport star. Lonergan's a guy that I feel like I know pretty well, saw him play in high school a lot. He's a really good athlete. This is not a guy who brings, obviously, starting and a lot of gameplay experience, but he has been around a college program. I think this is a little bit of an example of what Georgia's looking to bring in if it does go quarterback. It's not trying to get, for instance, say like the Cam Ward, the guy who comes in and becomes an immediate starter. They're looking for someone who can kind of supplement the depth they have in the quarterback room. That's what I believe that Lonergan would provide if he were to come here. The other name, which is a new one for me, but has been chatted about here for a few days, Deshaun Purdy of Charlotte. I won't pretend to know a lot about Purdy, but once again, there's a certain kind of category that seems that Georgia seems to be going after, guys that have some eligibility, that have some athleticism, and would supplement the depth and not necessarily be the kind of person that you would certainly predict were swoop in and become the starting quarterback necessarily. We're also seeing some interesting wide receiver names being mentioned. The one name that you don't really hear much about anymore is Singleton from Georgia Tech. It seems like he's likely going somewhere else. But as Connor reports, Dane Key from Kentucky, C.J. Daniels from LSU, J. Michael Sturdivant, I guess, has kind of popped on there from UCLA. I think that for me, Key is probably the most interesting of all of those names. But those are some of the wide receivers that it appears that Georgia's perhaps going after. And then a couple of defensive names to sort of give you here, too. Zechariah Poyser from Jacksonville State, and then Ethan O'Connor from Washington State. It is worth pointing out that we've gotten very used to, when it comes to Georgia and its recruiting classes, just very prodigious hauls when it comes to defensive backs. That was not quite the story for Georgia in this class of 2025. Still an elite class, of course, just not quite as deep when it comes to defensive backs. So perhaps having to look to the transfer portal ranks to bring in those guys because Dan Jackson's gone, Malachi Starks is likely gone, Julian Humphrey's already transferred. We'll see what kind of decision Dalen Everett chooses to make. But there is a need for defensive backs, perhaps not fully met by the 2025 class, and now going through the transfer portal to find all that. So there's a lot going on. There are players leaving. There'll be more added. Some of these players we just mentioned may actually end up being at Georgia. Some of them obviously may not. New names may pop up on the radar. More famous transfer names may be kicked around by fans, but perhaps not quite ever getting that Georgia connection. We'll do some more of that a little bit later on. Just trying to cover everything that's happening here right now. Certainly no easy feat, but we're doing our best on our show. And, of course, DawgNation.com is a great resource for you as all of this stuff pops out there. And, of course, it is always totally free. So check that out online, DawgNation.com. Really good piece from Connor Riley on that. And that's also around the Doghouse. Poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper. I told you before, Dr. Pepper going to be a big part of our Dog Nation Invasion event. We're really, really excited about that. in New Orleans. And the reason why is Dr. Pepper is just deeply connected to all things as it relates to college football. You see the Fansville commercials every single week on your screen, and you also know that when it's time to get stocked up on the best flavor for game day, the rich, one-of-a-kind flavor of Dr. Pepper, well, that's certainly the one that you want right there. So as you're at your local Kroger, wherever it is that you're doing your grocery shopping, make sure you get some great-tasting Dr. Pepper here today. For game day, for those Christmas and holiday parties, it's a great way to enjoy all of that. Just make sure you pick it up today and be a big part of that, because when it comes to us in college football, Dr. Pepper in college football is a pepper thing. So make sure you check them out. You can find them online, drpepper.com. But just wherever you're doing your grocery shopping, pick up some Dr. Pepper here today. Great to have Dr. Pepper as a part of Around the Doghouse. All right, so a lot to cover there. We've kind of gone a little bit long, so we will be, picking up the pace here, obviously, but looking forward to welcome our next guest into the program there, too, on a Monday. No better voice on all this stuff than our great friend John Stinchcomb, the former Georgia All-American, joins us here now today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So, John, we're doing the best we can. I don't know that we've succeeded in trying to keep up with who it appears might be leaving Georgia. We know Julian Humphrey is going to Texas A&M. That's the one thing we sort of know for sure. Other guys appears to be leaving. Long list of guys perhaps coming in. It's sort of a mess. No one likes this here in December, the best that I can tell. We'll talk more about that later on in the show today, too. How you doing as far as keeping up with all this portal stuff here right now? Have you declared emotional bankruptcy on it yet, or you feel like you've kind of got this well chronicled?
Well, I certainly am not up to date as much as some folks are, but I'm aware. It's this time of year where you have to pay attention, and it's almost like a second version of high school recruiting where you want to know some names, you want to have a good gauge of what's available and what's probable, but there's still so many different pieces. I think if history has taught us anything, is that Georgia has done a really good job of retaining top talent. There's a few exceptions there. I can think of Adonai Mitchell that got away, and there's some others where you think, well, I'd rather have them here. But then the other side is how selective Georgia is in bringing other players to be a part of this program. It has been first and foremost the priority to get and recruit high school players that are highly capable. And what we've seen in the transfer portal leaving Georgia is guys that, for whatever reason, for the most part, have had an opportunity to develop for a couple years and may not have matriculated up to the top of that stack the way that they wanted to, and might be looking for other opportunities. And then Georgia is very selective as to who they're going to bring in. I think, you look at a guy like Tyke Smith, who was, a conference player, rookie of the year for his conference coming in, and then had to wait his turn, understanding the competition at Georgia is so fierce. And he's not alone. You look at guys like London Humphreys, who was the marquee guy at his program and comes over and has been rotational at best. And Dom Lovett, same thing. For when he was at Missouri, he was far and away the best offensive weapon that they had. Comes to Georgia and has carved out a role, but certainly not that feature player. So I think that speaks to a couple things. I think it speaks to the competition that Georgia continues to have on the practice field, and also their selectivity when bringing in others to be a part of this program.
Talked a little earlier about Gunner Stockton, and, I feel like I've tried to sort of thread sort of a delicate needle here. I'm really, really excited about Gunner Stockton long-term as the starting quarterback for Georgia perhaps next year. Even in the college football playoff right now, I think that Georgia can be really well set up for success. I've also tried to say I think that people need to be careful. I think they need to be careful kind of putting too much on him. The way I keep saying it is, and perhaps this is sort of a corny way to think about it, but leave some room for him to exceed expectations. That if the bar is set so high that he can only meet them, then eventually everybody's just going to be miserable. That just does not seem like a very wise thing to do. So, John, do you get where I'm coming from on this? That Stockton may be a really good quarterback for Georgia, and the unique skill set that makes him different than Carson Beck may prove to be really, really valuable for the playoff. But, when you see what I would say overwhelming level of enthusiasm that exists for him right now, while I certainly appreciate Georgia fans' enthusiasm in whatever form that it takes, I think some of this almost gets to be a little, I don't want to say too much, but I think it has the potential to, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but do you get the idea? Do you get the idea that perhaps there's almost too much being put on him right now?
I'm going to preface by saying I think no one does a better job of hyping Dr. Pepper than you do, because it feels authentic, and you're one of their best proponents. And what I've enjoyed is watching some of their commercials, and one of them is their hype train, right? So you have these fans that get so over the top of excitement, and Gunner Stockton is a prime example of that. I think he brings something to the table that we haven't seen in quite some time at Georgia. Is probably since the Stetson days of that dual threat, gritty, gutty. He's going to threaten the defense with his legs at the quarterback position. We haven't seen that from Carson. Carson's able, but certainly that's not a main feature of what he does. But that needs to be tempered. The expectations of there's a reason why Carson was the far and away number one pick from this coaching staff. They wanted him to have those opportunities. It wasn't a timeshare. It wasn't, Gunner has earned these opportunities to carve out various series throughout the season, despite the fact that his game offers something that Carson didn't. With that said, what are realistic expectations for him? I think we saw glimmers of that in the SEC championship, where he does provide a run threat in the offense that defenses are going to need to account for his running ability. But what makes a dual threat a threat is his ability to also throw the ball. And I think Coach Bobo and the entire staff did their best to unload a lot of that ask from him early, when it was a lot of on-schedule throws, some predetermined route stuff where, it's a quick out where, there's not a lot of reading of the defense. It's get the ball where it's supposed to go. And Gunner was able to do that well. But we're going to have to expand upon every time we get into empty. Is it either a quarterback draw or a quick pass to basically a wide receiver screen? That package is going to need to expand. And so I think what's realistic for Gunner is having this almost month to prepare will allow not only him, but the coaching staff to realize what they can go into a game feeling comfortable about. And that's an expanded package. It's going to include his ability to run, obviously, but also what throw combinations is he comfortable with? What reads are you wanting him to make, and what's going to be predetermined? I think one of the beauties of Carson is the trust that he'd earned in getting the offense in the right play at the right time. And I'm grateful that now you have a coach in a quarterback's ear up to 15 seconds before the play clock expires, which hopefully we can utilize, because I think it takes a little bit more off the shoulders of Gunner.
Yeah, let me say it like this. I feel like when you go back and look at the first championship that Georgia won in the Kirby Smart era in 2021, that was a team where quarterback was just sort of one of the things that Georgia had going on that year. I think that Stetson Bennett gave UGA a really high level of play, but it's not like we really talked – if we were talking about Georgia correctly, it's not like we talked that much more about Bennett than we did Brock Bowers, an amazing freshman season, or one of the great defenses that have probably ever existed in college football. That if you talked about all the reasons why Georgia was winning a national championship, you would mention Bennett, but you mentioned a lot of other things prominently too. And I think for this Georgia team right now, if they also go on to playoff success, I think the same thing is sort of an appropriate way to discuss this, because frankly, while I was very happy with the level of play that Stockton provided when he came in for the SEC championship, the truth is what Stockton did for Georgia wasn't really more valuable than a defense getting 6 sacks or 15 tackles for loss, or Dalen Everett getting 2 interceptions, or Oscar Delp making 2 very big catches in overtime. We gravitate towards quarterback, and that's just human nature. That is not fixable. That is just what human beings do when it comes to watching football. There is a natural gravitational pull towards quarterback, and no one's ever going to fix that. But if we're really trying to be correct, I do think you have to notice that, hey, sometimes Georgia at its best, there's a little bit of a balance in terms of responsibility between quarterback, the other 10 guys in the field, and the 11 guys on the other side of the ball, and the special teams and stuff like that. And so I do think for this playoff year too, if on a Monday after a playoff game, if we're coming in and doing an entire show about Gunner Stockton, to be honest with you, I don't know if that's good news for Georgia necessarily. But if we're coming on here and talking about, well, Stockton did this, and Oscar Delp did that, and Trevor Etienne did this, and how about that defense? Well, that sort of feels like the kinds of conversations we've had before when Georgia's won some big football games. You get my point on that?
I do, and I think you look at the second half of that conference championship, and we learned something from it. I think one of the reasons why Gunner looked good is because the running game looked good. And we had tight ends that were a part of the offense, which we've seen at times throughout the season play a major role. And then there weren't the drops. So those are 3 aspects of when the offense is working well that makes any quarterback look better. Well, you talk about complementary football. We weren't asking Gunner to be in a situation like we did Carson when we're down 4 touchdowns against Alabama in hostile territory, and everyone in the stadium knows we're going to have to throw it around the field. That wasn't the ask. And I think that needs to remain part of the conversation when we're evaluating and we're asking Gunner to kind of take the reins. Is it's going to be we're spreading the load across all the shoulders of the players and coaches involved, that we come with a comprehensive approach and not just reliant on Gunner to create. And if at the end of the game all we're talking about is Gunner Stockton, I don't think that's going to bode real well for Georgia. I think you're right in saying we need other players, including the defense, to kind of step up and contribute. Really, that's been first and foremost in this Kirby Smart era. You look at the big win against Texas during the season, and it wasn't because of an outstanding offensive performance, but it was because of the defense being so totally dominant. And they certainly had a mirrored performance again against Texas in the conference championship. So I think when Georgia's at its best, the defense is humming, and it's able to spread the ball and the responsibilities across the offense. And I think getting the running game going was a huge piece. It will need to be. Having receivers that don't drop the ball is going to be important. And I think getting the tight ends involved in the passing game as kind of a carrot and reward for how they block in the run game is that third piece that can make Georgia successful. And then you can use that X factor of Gunner's ability to run the ball in addition to those meat and potatoes foundational pieces for this team.
Well, would you mind talking more about that part of it? Because as someone who has run blocked for a living, or at least half of your job run blocking for a living, we saw a Georgia rushing attack that did improve when Stockton came in the game. A lot of people assume, well, the threat of the running quarterback makes it a little bit easier on the more traditional running plays. How true do you believe that is?
Well, it certainly puts an onus on the defense. There's an added responsibility that they have to take account for. And I think what we've seen for our Georgia defense is that's a challenge. That's a challenge for any defense. Now, in the conference championship, there's a lot of design runs where we empty the backfield and it's Gunner one-on-one with a safety that, makes the play, but usually it's after gaining a few yards. Now that every team knows what Gunner's going to bring to the table, there is going to be preparation for that aspect of his game. You look at, I think, what made Georgia's just conventional, if you will, run successful, and it's more of what we've seen throughout the rest of the season. It's wide receivers and tight ends digging out and blocking second and third level players that gave opportunities to Frazier and Etienne. And then Frazier and Etienne's ability to make guys miss. And the unsung heroes of the bunch was the offensive line. I think you look at that second half, and they tried to step their game up. I think really that entire team recognized when you lose a player like Carson Beck, and I know he's taken plenty of shots. Heck, I've been one that have shot a few of them at him. But when you lose a guy of his caliber, and the reason why the expectations were so high is because that's where he wanted them. That's where he earned the bar to be. When you lose a player like that, I think it raises everyone's attention to what they have to do, that they have to focus on their job to make sure that this offense is clicking the way it's supposed to be. And that allowed for Gunner to come into a situation where the other 10 guys around him recognized they had to step up, and they did.
First round of the playoffs is this weekend. Obviously, you got 3 games on Saturday, but the game of note for Georgia fans is going to be on Friday night when Notre Dame hosts Indiana. You know, how excited are you about this, John? Both the kind of a new chapter for the sport, 4 first-round playoff games, the fact that Georgia's opponent is about to be learned here. This is all very, very new. And also kind of crammed right in at Christmas here, too, which is a little bit kind of an odd time to be having such big sporting events necessarily. How eager are you for what's going to take place this upcoming weekend?
I think it's going to be fun. I actually like this weekend more than I do some of the others that are down the road because they are home games. And, it's college model is so different. I think we're kind of caught with our feet in both the history and the future when it comes to some of these bowl games and their ties. And when you let's look at Georgia's path alone. We're going to New Orleans. Hopefully after that is Miami. And thankfully it's almost a home game with a trip to Atlanta. But that is a lot of ask of your fan base. And it's different than every other place where it's either you're home or away. And very rarely is it neutral, but because of the bowl game tie-ins, the ask of the Georgia fan base is multi-$1,000 trips now multiple times a year. And so I think, obviously it drives back to money. There's so much money tied up in these bowl games that they refuse to let them go, even when the model has changed as vastly as it has. But this weekend is really exciting because it's still that hostile environment that one team's going into and one team gets to create, and it's earned opportunities in that sense. And it's new for all of us. This entire 12-team format is new, and I think there's a lot of excitement there. I'm grateful that there's still plenty of opportunities for tweaks down the road because it certainly isn't flawless. But to have 2 games of exciting football before Christmas and after the conference championship is a welcomed change to my schedule, and I look forward to these games.
Related to this, since you bring it up, would you mind if I ask you a couple of things that don't have much to do with Georgia? You mentioned the excitement around the home games. There are 2 things that are out there right now that I think are really interesting. The one comes from Tennessee. Have you heard the rumor? And I don't even think it's a rumor. I think to a certain degree this has been confirmed, although the full breadth of it's not really known. That Tennessee fans got the link that Ohio State sent out to its ticket buyers, and apparently Tennessee fans have scarfed up tickets in the Horseshoe by the thousands. Now, we don't know how many that's necessarily going to be. It's still a 100,000-seat stadium, so there's still going to be an overwhelming presence for Ohio State fans there. But this is a Buckeye fan base. It's a little bit down in the dumps because they lost to Michigan. It's a Tennessee fan base that's playing the biggest football game they've played since, VCRs. How many Tennessee fans do you expect to be in Columbus? Because the rumor out there is they're traveling north by the tens of thousands. We'll find out if that's actually true.
I can't wait to see it. And I've certainly heard those rumors. I think Georgia was in this place a few years back where we hadn't had the opportunities to kind of make this deep run towards a national championship. And Tennessee has been in a vast wasteland of irrelevancy for so long that their fan base is eager to spend a few dollars to go watch their team play, and I think found a way to do it in droves. So I can't wait to see what that stadium looks like. Will it be the thousands that so many online and social media has projected it to be? I think that could be exciting. I know this. I've never seen a game at Ohio State, and that's one of the few stadiums that I would like to travel to. And I'm sure the Tennessee fan base is no exception, that if they had an opportunity to kind of go and invade and take over in a high-stakes matchup like they have coming up, they were going to take advantage of it. So it will be I'm sure, lesson learned for all these programs as to how best to manage these tickets. But it'll be exciting to see for two teams that I couldn't care less for.
Right.
But it does make it somewhat more relevant to the rest of the world as to see how that plays out.
Being told by our producer, Jay Black, the high on Saturday in Columbus, 28 degrees, the low 15 degrees. So for people who wanted cold weather, sort of, Rust Belt winter football, you are certainly going to get that when it comes to that on Saturday. And then finally there's this, and this is real. This is not – this is on the record from Ross Bjork, the Ohio State athletic director. Do you realize this? And I find this to be so objectionable, and I hope that somebody does this differently because this is not what anybody wants. So what Bjork told reporters last week is that while their people will be kind of managing the logistics of the game, the music and the PA and the video board is going to be run by the college football playoff. So while Ohio State is the home team playing in its home stadium, apparently Tennessee is going to get a run-out video the same way we do in the SEC championship when both teams kind of get some of their video bells and whistles, that Tennessee is apparently going to get that too, according to what Bjork said. I have a suspicion that Bjork leaked this as a way of getting somebody to change their mind once they realize how bad of an idea this is. But I don't like Ohio State at all. I mean, I can't stand, the Buckeyes. But if you get a chance to host a home game, you should get a chance to host it your way. Now, there's obviously precedent for this when it comes to the NCAA. Georgia fans know baseball regionals. You don't get the walk-up music, things like that. I'm sure the ladies' basketball is probably, a similar thing when they have the first-round sites, things like that. But this is outrageous. We've been waiting for these home playoff games. If it's essentially some sort of antiseptic, sort of, quasi-neutral site, that's not what anybody wants, is it, John?
No, and I think you've earned that, right? I think for the four teams that get to host these home games, some came at a high cost and a high toll. For Texas, for example, they had to play an extra game in the conference championship. Now, they did get kind of a pass because you lose and still get to compete for a national championship. But when you've earned this opportunity to host a game, let's honor that. I think it's not going to change a whole lot when you have these, the billboard and what you're going to display is going to change. No, it's not going to change the fan base. As a matter of fact, they might get more irate and loud and boisterous because of it. But I think we honor the teams that have earned these opportunities to host games. That's one of the fun aspects of playoff football, whether it's high school or professional. When you go to a hostile environment, even as a visitor, it gets your juices flowing, and you recognize that it's a special environment. To think that you're going to change that just because it's a college football playoff and they get to organize what music is played and what graphics are going to be displayed to the stadium. Now, I don't think that honors the game nor the host in a way that makes a whole lot of sense.
No, I think that's absolutely right, John. I knew that would be your opinion. I was glad that you shared that with us. Great to have you here. Merry Christmas to you and all your family. Appreciate your time here today. We'll look forward to, by the next time we speak, we'll be talking about who Georgia's playing, which should be a lot of fun indeed. So hope you have a great week and continue to enjoy this wonderful time of year. And maybe we'll get ready to talk about a big Georgia win coming up in the Sugar Bowl too. By the way, I'm sure you'll be called upon to be the party host and the ambassador as Georgia gets ready to go back to your adopted hometown of New Orleans. I'm guessing you may have extra responsibilities as that week progresses, perhaps.
There's already been a few texts asking for some restaurant recommendations, so I've got plenty of them. I stayed well fed when we lived down there, so it'll be a good trip. I look forward to some good football this weekend, finding out who Georgia's going to play. Yeah. It's going to be a great time of year.
Good stuff, John. Appreciate your time.
Appreciate it. Go Dogs.
Go Dogs, indeed.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, somehow on a day in which we're coming on a Monday, Georgia did not play. The show is on pace to be 17 hours long today, so that's just kind of the way it goes sometimes in college football. I will say, though, to sort of piggyback off of what John was saying a moment ago, can you imagine if Georgia laid its life on the line for 12 games, got a chance to host a game in Sanford Stadium, which is essentially like the first game, right? You know, Georgia could be the one playing on that Friday night. Let's say Georgia's playing. Let's just say Notre Dame's coming in or something like that. You know, Georgia's hosting the game. You got a team like this coming in. Do you know how demoralized Georgia fans would be because most people are not really aware of these kind of like stadium op logistic things. That's not the world most people live in. But right before like Notre Dame is running out, they're playing like some Dropkick Murphys video or whatever it is that Notre Dame has for a run out song. Like, can you imagine like how, Georgia fans would be aghast. And I don't use a word like aghast on the show very frequently, but Georgia fans would be apoplectic if you're playing Notre Dame video on the board before they run out onto the field. Like, that's not what a home team should have to do. But nonetheless, that may be what's going down. I believe Ross Bjork probably leaked this on purpose because I believe this is one of those things of, are we sure you're going to make us play, 17 versions of Rocky Top on our video board? I'm guessing that's probably not what they want to do. And let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean here. No leak when it comes to this. I am fully authorized to tell you it's about to be a huge year in 2025 for Royal Caribbean. So many new things happening. Perhaps the biggest thing for you to know about, though, it is showtime, go time for the DawgNation cruise. Y'all, when it starts to sort of turn the calendar to January, that's essentially like the final decisions about, getting ready for travel. And these ships, they just sell out. Royal Caribbean's a hot ticket right now. People love this brand. It is on fire. Every sailing is completely full. It's amazing just how much excitement and energy exists, especially around the new ships like Utopia of the Seas, which we're lucky enough to be on. Part of the reason why I wasn't sure if we'd be able to be on Utopia of the Seas for our DawgNation cruise, the newest of the Royal Caribbean ships currently, is because I just wasn't sure if there'd be space for us. Well, when we found out, we're going to secure a spot here, we're going to have a chance to do that. A, I was elated, but B, I knew that people would have to act fast to be able to take advantage of it because it's just going to go so quickly. So it may seem like April is a long way away, but when it comes to making travel plans, that's not necessarily true. So reach out to Jessica Slater today, 770-718-9147. 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. Talk to her about all the great things that Royal Caribbean has going on in 2025, including our DawgNation cruise. Make sure you check that out today. All right, we've got a lot of stuff we're going to kind of roll through here for a moment, including before we wrap up the show today, a shout out to the latest Georgia commit. That's exciting. And some really good news for Georgia basketball, man. That is a red-hot team right now. We'll get to that here coming up. First of all, Travis Hunter wins the Heisman Trophy. Nothing really new for me to say about this than what I said on Friday. I think this, by the way, nice shot there with him with the trophy. And congratulations to Georgia's own here, obviously a former product of the Collins Hill Eagles. I think this year, even though we didn't talk about it very much because it didn't really relate to Georgia, I think this year was a really fun Heisman Trophy race. Kind of a classic sort of MVP type candidacy for Ashton Jeanty. I do believe that Jeanty was more valuable to his team than Hunter was to his. But you also have the situation where Hunter just did something we've never really seen before. He's kind of like a Shohei Ohtani type player for college football. And that's really what the Heisman Trophy, I think, exists to serve. These, best player in a given year, of course, but also the sort of outstanding, unusual performances that sometimes get the attention of Heisman voters. Hunter feels very much in keeping with this. That, the Heisman Trophy in every year is not always quite the same. This year, I think, between Jeanty and Hunter was a pretty fun debate, and I think that Hunter, obviously a deserving winner when it comes to that. Other story here, and this is a big one right now. And I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Is it Pribula, is how you say it? Or Pribula? Bo Pribula, the backup quarterback for Penn State, has announced that he is leaving the team. We've seen this before in bowl situations. Now we'll see it when it comes to the college football playoff. Pribula wants to transfer, wants to go somewhere else. And because of the current portal window, and he said this, that this is the system that's causing him to do that. The current portal window is causing him to leave now so he can be basically in class to begin January, competing for the starting job at his new school right away. So therefore, he is not going to be a part of the college football playoff with Penn State. This is a big loss for the Nittany Lions, it is. And I could talk about this for hours. I'm not going to talk about it, obviously, nearly as long on this show. Let me just say this. And this is where things, I'm going to sound like a crazy person for a second, but let me just hear me out for a second. if you ever go for like a job interview, one of the questions you sometimes get asked in a job interview is, what is something you believe that most people don't believe? That's a kind of a common job interview type question. Well, for me, one of the things that I believe that most people don't believe, and most people probably think is crazy, here's what I believe. That college football is secretly run by a small but powerful group of people who are essentially enemies to the sport. And as crazy as that sounds, you would ask yourself, well, if college football wasn't run by its enemies, or let's say it was run by its enemies, would it be run any different than it is right now? That this system, transfer portal in December, pre-playoff, is ruinous. Ruinous perhaps here to Penn State, ruinous to the Independence Bowl because all of a sudden now Marshall's not going. They've had to be replaced by Louisiana Tech. Perhaps you don't care about that, but Army probably does. The point is the whole thing just is seemingly ruinous. And it almost seems like it would have to have been concocted by people who are secretly enemies to the sport. Because ultimately, the purpose of a system is what it does. And when you see chaos sown by the system, I think you have to assume that is the purpose of the system. That when things are crazy for Penn State or crazy for Marshall or crazy for the Independence Bowl or crazy, even to a degree, for Georgia, that craziness is inflicted on purpose. And I think that's the thing that people need to wrestle with. And a lot of that sort of outside the boundaries of our charter as a show here is, why are people purposely inflicting chaos on college football? Who gains from that? And what's that coming from? But when you see situations like this where an event that we ought to be excited about, and I'm no fan of Penn State, and I think Penn State's probably a little bit of a paper tiger, the kind of team that you probably would want to play if you're in the playoff. While on the one hand that's true, on a situation like this, really sympathize, for their fans who want to be excited about their run through the playoff. But right before this, hear that, a player that's pretty important, your backup quarterback, guy that's had a role on that team, is not going to be participating. This would be similar to Georgia before Carson Beck's injury. If it were to lose Gunner Stockton, Georgia fans would be, pretty panicked about that. And I think the Penn State fans are within their rights to sort of feel that way too. And no one among us can kind of laugh at Penn State here and say, ha, 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 we thought you guys were ready for the playoff. Apparently you're not, because we all realize no matter who we're fans of, our team's not impervious to this either, that some crazy thing could still pop up for any team as long as this portal remains open. And, when people ask the question of, well, how could chaos like this be allowed to go on? How can this exist? I think the only assumption that you can draw is it's all on purpose in some form or fashion. I mean, think about this for a moment, and then we're going to change the subject. You ever have like a subscription you try to cancel, or an email you try to unsubscribe from? Not always the easiest thing to do. That complication and frustrations, perhaps to a degree on purpose. Just notice some of this when it comes to this system here too. That when something is really, really chaotic because of a system that's being imposed, the chaos may be the point. And so just keep that in mind. A couple other things here really quick. Less, I would say, chaotic stuff. Jackson Arnold has left Oklahoma. He's now going to Auburn. Arnold, a former elite recruit, not a great career at Oklahoma, but probably still a pretty good prospect. And working with Hugh Freeze's offense at Auburn, if he does emerge as the starter, a much better situation than what existed with the Oklahoma offense here this year. So this, to me, is an example of not necessarily a home run portal acquisition, but when you look at what the Auburn quarterback situation used to be and what it is now, with a guy like Arnold, Deuce Knight's coming in, names like that, it is an example of a major upgrade for the position group overall, that room clearly getting better. And we sort of said a lot during the year that Auburn almost had the look of like a NBA team that was tanking, that Auburn was pretty content to be as bad as whatever it was this year, with the idea of spending big dollars going into this upcoming season in 2025. And the arrival of Arnold, I think, is an example of that. That Auburn has essentially been a non-factor in the SEC for much of the last few years. I don't think they expect to be a non-factor next year. My prediction is not that they'll be a playoff team, but I do expect them to be a likely 8 or 9 win team. And if that's the case, then you're a bounce away from maybe being in a playoff conversation. When you're thinking about major improvements year over year, teams may be ready to take a little bit of a leap. I would keep my eye on Auburn, although that is not something that most Georgia fans want to see be true, and I certainly understand that. Justice Haynes in the transfer portal, obviously the Georgia legacy. I don't expect Georgia to necessarily be a big factor in this based on some of the early chatter here right now, but I do like Haynes as a player. It's going to be interesting to see what the overall attrition looks like for Alabama here and how much of that they keep and how much of that they're able to change. I wish things could have been different because I do think Haynes could have been a very good player at Georgia. It just didn't quite work out, and now it seems like he's likely going somewhere else other than Georgia's still here too. And frankly, I'm not even really sure how much Georgia's even really involved, in all that for him necessarily. But I do think the first time around when coming out of high school, Justice Haynes could have really found a spot here at Georgia. Didn't quite happen. Now he's on the move again, and it doesn't seem like Georgia's likely to be the landing spot on this either. I saw where Michael Van Buren, the starting quarterback at Mississippi State this year, is now going to LSU. What's interesting here is this comes after Garrett Nussmeier announced that he was coming back. So now you've got a quarterback room at LSU that includes Van Buren and Nussmeier. You can assume here that some of the Van Buren stuff may be money left over from not getting Bryce Underwood. Now, this is where I'm going to tell you, and I perhaps am wrong about this. Given the price that you would likely have to pay to get Van Buren on your roster, a guy with SEC starting experience, and given the price we're led to believe you'd have to pay to get Bryce Underwood, like an 8-figure sum of money, maybe $10 million, is there a chance that for the money, Van Buren represents a better value because he does have SEC experience? I'm not saying he's a better player. We're led to believe that Underwood's one of the great prospects that's come into college football in recent years, and who might argue with that? But given the price and given the different level of experience, is there a chance there's a better value in a guy like Van Buren? And I do think that value is the kind of thing we're going to have to start thinking about more frequently when it comes to transfers. That not every instance in which the team gets the player is that team going to really be the winner. Much like professional sports, where you sort of have to know the amount that you spent to figure out whether or not that was a smart move to make. The prices attached to these players are going to become more of an important part of that discussion. And Van Buren, given the price tag that they likely, had attached to his name, maybe they represent some real value here because he does have that SEC experience. I'll also mention a couple of other things really quickly. First of all, Texas A&M goes out and gets Micah Hudson, the former 5-star receiver who had been at Texas Tech. This is an example to me of just what the SEC does. Like, for the most part, A&M was like the 7th best team in the SEC this year based on rankings and things like that. So the number 7 team in the SEC is spending the kind of NIL bucks to get a 5-star receiver out of the transfer portal. Compare that to, like, say, the Big Ten with, like, the number 7 team that's probably like an Iowa, probably a Minnesota. Are they as aggressive as that? In the ACC, a league that, by the way, got a second playoff team, you look at their number 7 team, it's probably like a Georgia Tech or a Boston College. Is that anywhere near the same universe as the SEC? Almost the median team in our league is Texas A&M, with 100-something thousand people at Kyle Field, spending heaven knows what kind of money on a guy like Hudson here. That's just the depth of the SEC on display. That for as hard as A&M is trying to be great at football, they're still 7th best in this league right now. It is a very, very tough conference. By the way, state championships begin today. Our Cody Chavins will be a part of that for the TV product, so make sure you check that out. And if you see him, you'll enjoy that, no doubt. Tonight's sort of main event game is the 4A title game between North Oconee. You'll recognize a lot of famous last names in that team. Also, Landon Roldan, the Georgia signee there for that. Marist on the other side. That's a good Marist team. Obviously, Alan Chadwick's been coaching there since the 1980s. He says the option quarterback they have right now is one of the best they've ever had in all the decades he's been there. Like Sean McVay and all the other quarterbacks they've had, they like their guy right now as much as anybody. So, true classic triple option against a North Oconee team with a Georgia signee and a bunch of famous last names that you'll recognize. It's a pretty good game tonight. So, 4A state title game getting going later on this evening. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, let me also do this here for a moment. I want to give a shout out to our friends at Jittery Joe's. Obviously, big things going on with Jittery Joe's here right now. So much excitement for them. when it comes to the terrific holiday commemorative cans they're giving out. Not giving out. They are offering them to you right now as a part of your Christmas gift. So you want to buy a Christmas gift for a tough-to-buy-for person. Everybody loves Georgia stuff. These commemorative cans are an awesome way to collect some of the great moments for Georgia, but also on the inside, enjoy the great tasting coffee of Jittery Joe's as a part of that too. What a great opportunity that is. Jittery Joe's gives you that chance. You're going to love that. The delicious coffee. It's Athens' best, been voted that way 14 years in a row, been locally owned and roasted right there in the Athens area for the last 30 years. And these commemorative cans are a really cool way to sort of celebrate the Christmas and holiday season. So go in store and get one of those. You can also download the Jittery Joe's app and get great savings on your next beverage from Jittery Joe's. A lot of good stuff going on at Jittery Joe's. Make sure you check them out online, jitteryjoes.com. I'll also give a quick shout out here to our friends at White's Pools. I always think about Christmas vacation because we're obviously in that time of year when you talk about swimming pools, putting the swimming pool in. If you want to be like Clark Griswold and put in a great-looking pool here for your home this holiday season, our friends at White's Pools can help you out with all of that. It's a family-owned business. They've been doing this now for 4 generations, internationally recognized their design work. They put a great pool in for Coach Rick. They can do gorgeous work with a pool for you and a wonderful hardscape to go around all of that. They got 2 retail locations right here in our area in Watkinsville and Loganville. You can check them out on that today. And don't forget, you get a free AquaRite salt system on all their new construction products. You can go online. You can book your custom pool design and have some great fun with all that. Check them out online. It's whitespools.com. WHITES, just like the color, whitespools.com for more on that today. Now, before we wrap up here, let me also let's hold off on the music just for 1 second. Let's give a shout out here to Georgia Basketball. What a great win they got over the weekend, beating Grand Canyon. If you don't follow college basketball, then that may not sound like much, but Georgia does get a win over a Grand Canyon team that's no stranger to the NCAA tournament, would be in the tournament field if the season ended today. Georgia gets another one of those wins. It is an example of 2 things. The SEC's pre-conference work through the basketball season thus far is essentially historic. They have dominated pre-conference play. They own the SEC-ACC Challenge, for instance. So the SEC right now is as deep as it's been probably forever. And Georgia's move up in the pecking order on that is real. This is a 9-1 team right now with sights set on SEC play. This is, at the moment, a tournament team. I would say that they're going to start being mentioned more in conversations of the top 25. I don't know how it ends. I don't know where it's going. But Georgia's basketball team right now, Asa Newell, the 5-star, the other big guy that they kind of have paired with him down there in the low block right now, this is a real team doing some real things and certainly worth our attention as the football season gives way to winter. So shout out to the college basketball team. Georgia doing some good stuff here this weekend. Off to a great start already here this season. And with that, we'll get ready to wrap things up today. A couple of golden shoes here for a moment. Let's give the first one out here. Talked a lot about Gunner Stockton off the top of the show. Our buddy George on Tap, writing in after Jeff Sentell wrote a great story about Gunner here this week. He says, let's gun him with Gunner Stockton, sort of the old school throwback to the cool-looking airplane there. Go Dogs, gun him, he says. Good stuff from George on Tap on that. We will give him a golden shoe. Also a golden shoe going out for some good news for Georgian recruiting. You know, Seven Cloud's a name, if you follow Georgia recruiting a lot, it's been in our lives for quite some time. Almost becomes sort of funny just how long we've been hearing about Seven Cloud without actually seeing him here at Georgia. But much deeper than that, there's actually a really inspiring story here of a young man that's really persevered to sort of stay on Georgia's radar, and this weekend announcing he's rejoining a Georgia class now for 2026 after a little bit of a long and winding road as a football player. I think that's outstanding news. You can read more about that at DawgNation.com, but we'll give Seven Cloud a golden shoe here, too, for being once again now part of the Georgia football family and a part of the class of 2026 now. So that's really good news there. And here's what else is good news. How about the fact that our Gator Hater Updater has now reached 1,500 days. We love our round numbers around here, and that's a great one to see. When we started doing the Gator Hater Updater many years ago, we were doing it for the simple reason that Georgia had been struggling against Florida. It had been a mountain that was very difficult for Georgia to climb. But now here we are. It has been a long time since any of us have had to hear any kind of trash talk from those lousy, stinking Gators. And you love all of that. Eddie returns January 24th. He loves this too. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And on video time now for the R.S. Andrews cool down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn 2 for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs, they show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that today. So make sure you check that out. Okay, we got to be quick today because our buddy Mike and Cody with their On the Beat show, they are going to record that quicker and sooner today than they normally do. So they're going to be coming in here in a little bit to get you ready for that tonight. So I'm going to get out of their way so they can do that. So let me pop around the comment section here a little bit. We'll find out what's on everybody's mind. And we'll see what's going on. Aaron Dixon pointing out the fight last night in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. So I didn't really see that. I don't watch a ton of NFL. I try to watch more this time of year, but it's been my son's birthday. So we had a birthday party for him yesterday. So I was, for the most part, kind of running around with that. But I did hear some of the social media stuff on that. I guess Darnell Washington, I saw the one video clip where it looks like Washington's like just moving a guy like right into your field of vision and the camera. You know how scary that would be? Like Darnell, like all football players are big. Like Darnell is like shockingly big. Can you imagine like him just, I mean, if he wants to move somebody, they're going whichever direction he wants to go. I don't care what position you play. If Darnell Washington wants to move you, you were on the move. You know, you were going to be leaving your feet and on the move. So I did see that video, but I didn't really know what the context was for any of that. That's funny. Let's see what else. KC says, say what you want about NIL, but Kirby's done a good job in getting his players drafted, and the success that Bowers and Ladd are having going to help with recruiting. Look, I think the unspoken thing in all of this is, and perhaps it doesn't need to stay unspoken, we should probably be saying it out loud, is that I do believe that college football is in the midst of chaos, and I do believe that some of this chaos is on purpose. And yet, when you look at how Georgia's performed, Georgia, to its credit, is just figuring it out. That doesn't mean that everything goes perfectly. And Georgia may not win the national championship this season. You know, there are still sort of the regular sort of ebbs and flows of competition. But when you look at what Georgia was, what it is now evolving into, the best that I can tell is that Georgia is in the process of figuring all of this out. And I do believe they deserve credit for that. I do. Lance D says, why would anybody challenge Big O? Yeah. Like, imagine how much self-confidence you'd have to look at him and say, hey, you want a piece of this? Like, I mean, can you imagine how much self-confidence one would have to do that? That is a level of confidence that I couldn't even dream of aspiring to. Memphis Dog says the lawyers and the accountants are authors of the chaos. Perhaps that's the case, but there's also two other things going on here, too. Like I saw the other day, do y'all know who Shannon Terry is? He's the, the CEO, I guess, of On3. Started Rival, started 24/7. Now he's at On3. He was talking the other day about how he thought that when it comes to the overall media rights package for college football, there's room to add a couple of more $1 billion to the overall rights figure for college football, even greater, media rights deals in the future. And he very well may be right about this. He's a very smart businessman. But the point I'm getting to is that if that turns out to be true, if there are additional billions that could come to college athletics that aren't currently in the monetary pool that the sport is enjoying, those billions are going to come from somewhere. Billions that are currently being spent on something else would start being spent on college football if the sport's going to grow to that degree. Now ask yourself this question. Would the people who would stand to lose billions by college football's growth be happy about that? And if they had the power, powerful people who already have control of billions, if they had the power to slow some of that growth down, would they perhaps try to do that? You're left to wonder. Also, keep this in mind. I know this is all crazy talk, but, disregard it completely if you want to. What is the main reason why so-and-so quarterback, what is his name, Pribula, however you say his name, from Penn State, one of the main reasons you'll hear cited for why a guy like that has to leave now as opposed to after the playoff is done, let's say Penn State made a run towards a championship, which seems unlikely, but just for the sake of conversation, let's say that's true. One of the things we're told is, well, you got to be in place by the beginning of January because you have to start school. And I'm not anti what's his name, Cardell Jones. I'm not anti-school necessarily, but we're told that the academic deadline is a hard line that cannot be crossed. I find that to be interesting here too, because people think of college athletics as this like sort of giant entity that doesn't have to answer to anybody. But the truth is, the actual colleges themselves, from a monetary standpoint, from a power and influence standpoint, dwarf college athletics. The colleges themselves dwarf college athletics. And, when you're looking at, okay, well, what's going on here, sort of a reassertion of authority by the academic part of the university, I think some of that may be going on too. But like I said, most of this sort of outside the boundary of our charter. So I'm going to let it go for now. Let me go to Facebook here for a moment. Marshall Fleming says he's staying at Penn State. Now, is there more that's come out on this? If so, I haven't seen that. Bill Sanders says the BA goes X-Files on us. Listen, I obviously know that some of what I feel like is going on with college sports is probably pretty crazy sounding, but I'm also pretty convinced that's what this is. And the actual craziest part of all of this, I'm not even going to talk about it all, but yeah. Lorenzo Fleming says the SEC should go back to CBS. The Big Ten on CBS was dull this year. I will say, I was really sad about losing CBS from our lives, and I was really pretty skeptical about how ESPN, ABC would do for the SEC, but it's done great. It really has done great. I missed the song. I love the song, and I don't think the kind of like bells and whistles have necessarily arrived, but the actual product itself has been pretty good. And the fact that ABC, ESPN is delivering the big night games that people want in a way that Fox is not for the Big Ten, that's a big deal too. Once again, the Penn State fans, man, they're furious because, they didn't get like Ohio State for their whiteout game. Ohio State's mad because they play always at noon. In fact, one of the interesting things about playing Tennessee is they finally get a night game. By the way, see, you always want to get me in trouble. Matt Rukovin is bringing up the drones now. Y'all are trying to get me drawn off sides. My thing about the drones is, I can't tell, are they real or not? I feel like this shouldn't be that hard of a question to answer. Are the drones just airplanes, and are people trying to have fun with this, or are the drones real? Why is that such a hard question to answer? I find that to be wild that we can't get a more straight up answer on that. Let me go to DawgNation.com. Scott Harris says the best game on CBS all year was the Army-Navy game. Yeah, they did a good job with that. Game always feels really fun and big. I also think there's something about watching, and neither Army nor Navy are as exclusively triple option as they used to be. I sort of find when you watch an Army-Navy game and how certainly the triple option influence that still exists there, even if it's not quite as much triple as it used to be, I feel like you learn a lot more about football by watching how teams, and I'm not trying to be snarky, I'm just being real, teams that move a little slower, and when you watch the way in which they're trying to create running lanes and space and how the defense responds to that, and you can kind of see the blockers kind of, the role that the pulling guard plays, things like that. I feel like you can learn a lot about football watching the Army-Navy game, where it's like if you're watching, Georgia and Texas, some of that's just a blur. Some of that's just like athletes that are beyond our comprehension moving at a pace that almost seems supernatural. I'm not really quite so sure how much there is to sort of learn about football in real time by watching that because of just how, it's just confounding. But Army-Navy, you can sort of see the chess pieces moving around the board a little bit more. And I do think there is some football knowledge to be gained just by watching that. Rambo says if you want plenty of stats and win the Heisman, you can go to Colorado. And if you want to win championships and be NFL ready, you can come to Georgia. That's true. I'm obviously pretty critical of some teams and their playoff status based on who they've played. But I'm not critical of Travis Hunter and his performance this year because of who he's played. I mean, everybody wanted Hunter. Georgia wanted him badly. He just chose to go to Colorado. And, yeah, ultimately he didn't come close to winning a championship there. But you know, his career certainly speaks for itself. So I am for whatever, and maybe this is kind of an incongruent way to look at it, but I'm big on strength of schedule when it comes to the teams themselves, but I'm not that big on strength of schedule when it comes to the players. In other words, you look at the Travis Hunter performance, playing 100-something snaps a game, playing at Hunter, with almost no dispute, could be a first-round draft pick as both a wide receiver and as a defensive back, and probably will be viewed as both, right? I mean, he's going to be drafted as a, first round on both sides of the ball. That is a career that speaks for itself. And he probably would not have played as many snaps playing for a different team, but nonetheless, that's what he did. So, last year we were really against the Deion hype. We're always happy to sort of point out the strength of schedule for some of the teams that get touted. But I don't think you can say that Hunter is an inflation on the basis of Colorado's strength of schedule. First of all, the Big 12, week to week, is actually a decent brand of football. Week to week, what they're playing in the Big 12 is better week to week than what they're playing in the ACC, for instance. So I would say that I'm pretty pro Travis Hunter for the most part. Savannah Bryant says the Big Ten used to have a rule, no night games after dark after Halloween. They must have changed their rule for the new TV package. Yeah, it's a little different now, obviously, because, the night games are lucrative, but, Fox tried to kind of find its way with the big noon kickoff. They have had TV rating success with that, but the fans hate it, and almost unanimously they hate it. Rambo says, I would love to have had Hunter at Georgia. There's no way he would have had the playing time at different positions he had at Colorado. Yeah, this is one of those things where, I do wish, Kirby would never answer this question, but you almost wish you could ask him if you did have Travis Hunter, because you obviously recruited him, and I think that George was a little closer to getting Hunter at times than maybe people realized. But if you did get Hunter, how would you have used him? Would you have used him on both sides of the ball? George is very, very aware of how many snaps its players are playing, and it does not like to overplay anybody. So they clearly would not have done what Colorado did. But also, I don't say that to say that Colorado did a disservice to Travis Hunter, because he probably doesn't win the Heisman Trophy if he doesn't play as many snaps, and he may not be as drafted as highly as he will be if not for that too. So I don't think you can say that Deion did wrong by Hunter by playing him as much as he did, although that is a lot of snaps. But on a different kind of team, he would not have been playing as much. Herb Hamilton kind of wondering if more college players might one day skip the NFL. I mean, I do think you see a situation almost now where the money that's being rumored for some of these transfers, some of the transfers last year, is so crazy that if you gave me that amount of money, I wouldn't care if I went to the NFL. Because, I mean, to me, when you think about just basic rates of return and, things like inflation, things like that, to me, $2 million is a pretty interesting line, where obviously less than $2 million is going to be a lot of money to me and probably to most of you too. But if I give you $1 million at 18, it's probably not going to last you for your entire life. You're going to probably eventually, lose. You're going to start eating into that principal, that capital, and you're going to, you'd have the risk of eventually just spending all that money. Whereas if it's $2 million, you'd have a chance. That money could fund your life for the rest of your life if you sort of think about it and invest it the right way. At least go a long way towards being a major supplement for that. And so when you start hearing about these, players that are getting like the sort of multiples of seven figures, well, now you are talking about the kind of thing where, all of a sudden, if my son was in a situation like that, the NFL does become less important after a while. Let's see what else. SEM Dog says Champ Bailey was never fully appreciated by the national media. I think that's true. I think in a different age, Bailey would have gotten a lot more attention. I do think that's probably true. In a different era, Bailey would have probably gotten more attention. All right, let me do a couple of more comments. We got to go. Bobby B says Hunter would be a receiver at Georgia with possibly a fit in the nickel position on defense. I could see that being true. I'll tell you, man, I thought he was such a beautiful receiver in high school. I loved the way in which he ran his routes, the way that he just created so much open space for himself just by the precision of the route and just the smoothness of his athleticism. He was a really fun player to watch. A really fun player to watch. Let's see what else. Alan Hampton says that Hunter was going to be a first-round pick regardless of where he went, but the problem now is the extra wear and tear on his body. Maybe so, but I don't think – and listen, maybe I'm wrong about this. Maybe Alan's right, but I don't think a guy like this playing a lot of receiver cornerback is the same thing as, like, say – remember, like, Ron Dane, like the Wisconsin running back, who's just getting like 1,000 carries a game for like 4 yards at a time? Like, that to me is wear and tear. Like, I don't know that receiver cornerback like that is the same type of wear and tear to the point where it's going to shorten his career on the other side. Or, you know, the example, Jake Fromm and I were talking about this the other day. The pitcher who eats up a lot of innings as an amateur, like, that's wear and tear. Like, you've probably only got so many innings in your life. And if you use them all, you know, at the, you know, elite Georgia Nationals, you know, at whatever park on the weekend, well, that's your choice. Like, I don't think the Hunter thing's the same type of deal, but maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't think so. Spencer Clark, I do remember Michael Greer. I do. That's a Georgia legacy, right? His dad also played at Georgia, too. Mr. Wise says Hunter's numbers in his respective positions were nowhere near as good as Genty's. Taking nothing from Trav, playing both ways is tough, but the Heisman is absolutely a popularity contest now. I would say that's kind of true. I mean, like, Mr. Wise, I'm telling you right now, I think that Ashton Genty had a great argument for the Heisman Trophy. I really do. That if we put you and a bunch of other, like, smart football fans on one side of the room and y'all are, like, making the case for Genty, I think he's got a pretty good case to win the award. You put the Travis Hunter people on the other side of the room, now they're making their case. I think they've got a pretty good argument, too. If I'm the judge in this situation, I think the reason why I would probably side with the Hunter part of it is that while you say, hey, the Heisman's become a popularity contest, the one thing the Heisman has never been is an MVP award. That Ashton Genty, to me, is the most valuable player in college football this year. Boise State is not the 3 seed without Genty. We all understand that. But the Heisman's not an MVP. It is the most outstanding player. And I know this gets kind of corny, but if you take the word outstanding in its most literal sense, standing out from others, playing at that level on both sides of the ball, that is a standout performance. Genty was this year's MVP. It'd be kind of cool if college football had an MVP, you know, like the Maxwell or something like that. You know, maybe they should, one of these awards should sort of redefine itself as a little bit more of a true MVP, because I think the question of most outstanding player and most valuable player are different things. I think the Heisman, based on its, you know, its charter, is for the most outstanding player. But the Genty argument, I think, is a legitimate one. So that's why I think this year's Heisman was really fun. I think this was a good year for the Heisman. And by the way, you know, Genty got a lot more first-round votes, or not first-round, but a lot more votes, first-place votes than people would have maybe thought. Thank you, Kaylee. I don't know if y'all heard that, but she says the smallest margin of victory since 2009. So that's cool. I didn't realize it was that close. I did know he got a lot more votes than I think a lot of people expected. That's a pretty fun debate. And the Genty case is a legitimate one, but I gave you my reason for why I would decide with Hunter. All right. Very quick. Anything else? Brian Whitaker says it's crazy that $1 million doesn't go as far in this day and time anymore. Yeah, I mean, it is the case. But even in like the old sort of, I guess, pre-inflationary world, I mean, $1 million stretched over the entirety of a lifetime, starts to disappear a lot quicker. But I get the point that you're making. Let us see. Randy Huffman predicts that Georgia will win the national championship. Perhaps that's a good way to close this out here today. All right, really good. Oh, by the way, Herb Hamilton also mentioned sad news from the NFL yesterday. Nick Chubb has broken his foot. You talk about a guy who's just been through it all and has been such an inspiration through every one of these injury recoveries. You hate to see another, tough setback for him. But, man, football is hard on feet. I mean, you talk about, that Scarface meme of, like, the money and, Al Pacino characters like laughing on the phone. I feel like that's what podiatrists do when they see football. There's so many foot injuries in football because of these big dudes and their cleats and things like that. But you hate the setback for Nick Chubb, man. Tough news for him. Hopefully, hopefully there'll be more happy headlines for him in the future. All right, we got to go now. Oh, by the way, Randy Hall also mentioned the Army won the Joe Moore Award, so shout out to them for that performance. And they do have a bowl opponent now, too. Marshall stepped out. I believe Louisiana Tech is stepping in. So there you go. All right. Y'all have a great day. Check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. Show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that today. Get your heating system tuned back up to factory fresh spec. That's always good news. And y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then.